as we've mentioned, just get a Truth Social post from Donald Trump in response to the Howard Stern interview Biden did this morning, in which he said he's open to debating him. Donald Trump says anywhere, anytime, any place, even suggesting a venue, the courthouse tonight on national television.
I think Jordan Fabian gets a facial tick every time there's a post on Truth Social. Having spent time covering the Trump administration, now covering the Biden White House for us at Bloomberg, I'm pretty sure, Kaylee, that we have not had Jordan on the program since he got a question in the Rose Garden when the Japanese Prime Minister was here in Washington. He's driving the news every day from the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Great to see you, Jordan. What do you make of this idea of a campaign with no debates? I guess technically we've kind of had one already when it involves Donald Trump. He didn't show up for a single debate on the primary trail. And Joe Biden's trying to figure out if this is a smart move politically. Rick Davis was telling us earlier he wouldn't let his candidate in a debate like that.
Yeah, it would be uncharted territory for a presidential campaign in a television age. These debates have been normalized, routine things that Americans have been used to since the 1970s. Yeah. They're like highly regulated by this nonpartisan commission. It's this part of the campaign cadence that people come to expect. So if they were not to happen, there would certainly be a void, especially for voters deciding, because these debates traditionally happen later in the cycle, people who haven't made up their mind, those coveted swing voters, they wouldn't be able to hear from those candidates on a national stage, tens of millions of people watching, if those debates were not to happen.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I guess it becomes a question, as Rick was also pointing out, of the kind of infrastructure it takes to even get these debates in place, that they haven't even begun. How close to the election, realistically, we could even see this happening. In the meantime, though, President Biden does have the advantage of being able to do things like be in the Rose Garden and receive questions from Jordan Fabian, the powers of the presidency, and frankly, the ability to roam freely and not be tied to a courtroom in New York like Trump is right now. How do you think about that split screen? Because Joe Biden literally just returned to Washington from being in New York himself yesterday under very different circumstances.
Yeah, we wrote about this dynamic yesterday. It definitely gives the president a structural advantage. Now, he has a lot of ground to make up. All the polls, including our own, show either a very close race or a narrow lead for Donald Trump, despite all these problems that he's having, getting tied up in court, disapproval on abortion, et cetera. So, Biden needs this time to try and make up ground. And right now, you're seeing him focus on rallying his base. You've seen him make moves like try to cancel more student debt. He appeared with AOC at this climate event on Earth Day earlier this week. So he's using this time to try to consolidate the base, because we just talked about the undecided voters. This is also going to be a base election. Both candidates need to motivate their hardcore supporters to come out, and that's what Biden's trying to get right now.
So what do you make of the calculation to sit down for over an hour with Howard Stern? This is fascinating to me. In full disclosure, I used to work at that company down the hall. But this is the type of thing that Barack Obama did real well, right? Getting in front of regular people. But to put your president out there, or your candidate in this case, for an hour and 15 minutes, uninterrupted, uncensored talk, that could go in a lot of different directions. What does it tell us about the mindset here of taking a risk like that this early?
It's interesting because, well, first of all, the criticism of Joe Biden is that he's been sort of cooped up by his staff, at least last year. Yeah. The shows they're letting him get a little looser now that the campaign is upon us. They realize they need to get him out there in front of the American people, show him that he can go for an hour or more with Howard Stern to perhaps counter some of those age concerns, some of those concerns about stamina, and that he can sort of have the repartee with someone like Howard Stern, who's going to ask him questions like, how did you meet your wife, and sort of, what was going down at the pool and when you were a lifeguard and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was pretty biographic, a lot of the interview, it seemed.
This is
kind
your
of
life.
Running through the story of Joe Biden.
But that's as opposed to a partisan, right? Or a journalist, like you coming into an environment like this. It's a different proposition when you're talking to a personality like that, right?
Yeah, and frankly, Howard Stern has become a pretty solid Joe Biden supporter.
That's fair.
So we shouldn't pretend this was going to be a tough interview.
And a former friend of Donald Trump.
Yeah, exactly. It would be interesting, with this interview happened in 2005, what the tone would have been versus now.
Very good
point. Don't think we'd be airing any of that.
Well, and then I guess we'll see if he decides to do network interviews. Let the record show President Biden does have a standing invitation to join us here on Balance of Power.